morning.
Welcome to Freedom Church. My name is Jordan.
My name is Joanne.
And we are here in Kenya right now in East Africa. And we're so glad you joined us wherever you are from for part 2 of Exodus.
So excited.
It's been a great series already.
And if you are joining us for the first time, either it's online or in our venues, or you are in your home and somebody sent you a link, you are so welcome. And you are a VIP. And we would really love to hear from you. So connect with us. Send us an email or a message, or even on this Facebook chats. Talk to us. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, chat to us. Why not?
Why not?
But also another way that you can be following us and seeing, maybe fresh content or things that are going on or things that are coming up is by following us on social media. So please follow us on our different social media platforms, on YouTube or on Instagram and Facebook and whatever that looks like for you. But we would love to have you join us on those social media platforms as well.
Yes, please. And like we promised last week, we just had the cave not too long ago, and we promised some highlights. It was an incredible time.
Amazing.
This was our 10th year of doing the cave, and it was incredible, life-changing. But we do have some highlights today, and we are going to be sharing some of those highlights and some of the stories, so stay tuned.
It was so great to hear some of his stories of life change and how the cave impacted people. We love hearing stories. It's so encouraging and so powerful as well. So if you have a story that you want to share, whether it was something that impacted you at the cave, something that God did in you, or maybe just a story in general about how Freedom Church or the messages that we put out have touched your lives, wherever you are in the world, reach out to us at hello@freedomchurch.cc and let us know your story.
Yes, please do. And another thing that we have here at Freedom, we have what we call our DNA. And our DNA is basically like our values. Like we said, we're in many locations, different parts of the world, but we have these values that sort of like connect us. And like in any family, the reason why people share resemblance is because of their DNA. We'll be like, listen, we'll be seeing some of these people, we're like, that's your son because you look like him. It's because of the DNA. And even us, in Freedom Church, we do have this DNA. So if you go to Kampala, you go to Chennai, you go to South Africa, and in the European campuses, we all share these values.
And one of the values that we want to share today, one of our DNA is changeling. And changeling is one of my favorite DNA. It's such a powerful one. And I feel like so many of them relate to this one because it's all about, if you want to pursue any of these other DNA, you have to have this heart of change. So let me read the description for you. Changeling. We are on a consistent journey of transformation and personal freedom to become more like Jesus.
Yeah.
We refuse to get stuck in our ways, taking individual responsibility for our own learning and growth.
Yeah, and let's be honest, sometimes growth, changing is not easy. It's not a piece of cake. It can be difficult, but we truly believe it's something that is so worth it, especially when we see it from the context of really following Jesus and giving our lives to Jesus. So we really encourage you to pursue change, be a changeling.
So true. And with this series that we're in, Exodus, this is such an important DNA for us as we're pursuing more personal freedom in our lives. We have to change some things. We have to change some lifestyle or some habits or some different things. So pursue this DNA of changeling today. But guys, right now we're gonna have a time of worship wherever you are in the world, whether you're watching this on a screen, at your home by yourself or in a venue. God can move powerfully through this video worship. So let's get on our feet, let's give him all the honor, all the praise, and let's worship him right now.
Choice but to believe my doubts are burning like ashes in the wind. What we say in church, so long to my old friends. Burden and bitterness, you can just keep it moving. Oh, you ain't welcome here. But not till I walk the streets of gold, of how you saved my soul. This wayward soul has found her way back home. a broken hole. I believe that the curse of sin was broken when they rolled away the stone. I believe, I believe, I believe. And as I bow before you, Lord, I will rise in confidence. I will see your goodness, Lord, in the land I'm living in. No matter where I go, no matter where I've been, I will see your goodness, Lord, in the land I'm living in. Come on, sing, I believe that the walls will start falling. When we fall down on our knees, I believe that the lame will go walking and the blind are gonna see. I believe that the gates of hell will tremble. Church begins to sing. I believe, I believe, I believe. And as I bow before you, Lord, I will rise in confidence. I will see your goodness, Lord, in the land I'm living in. No matter where I go, no matter where I've been, I will see your goodness, Lord, in the land I'm living in. Come on, let's sing this out. Sing it to the daughters, sing it to the sons, to every generation. Look at what the Lord has done. Sing it to the darkness, that the light has come. Sing it to the nations. Look at what the Lord has done. Sing it to the daughters, sing it to the sons, to every generation. Look at what the Lord has done. Sing it to the darkness, that the light has come. Sing it to the nations. Look at what the Lord has done. Look at what the Lord has done. Bow before you, Lord, I will rise in confidence. I will see your goodness, Lord, in the land I'm living in. No matter where I go, no matter where I've been, I will see your goodness, Lord, in the land I'm living in. As I bow before you, Lord, I will rise in confidence. I will see your goodness, Lord, in the land I'm living in. No matter where I go, no matter where I've been, I will see your goodness, Lord, in the land I'm living in. We're going to continue to worship. We're going to continue to declare our God is good. That He shines a light in the darkness, and the darkness will not overcome this morning. Our God is a God of promises, and we stand true to that. In Jesus' name. Not gonna wait for the walls to fall. 'Cause I know a name that will bring them down. And I've got a praise waking within my soul. And I'm not ashamed.
Hello Freedom Church, and it's my pleasure to be able to bring you this next part of the Exodus series today. After you guys have just experienced the cave around the world, I get to share this message. So it's a real privilege and a real honor to be able to get to bring you the word today. And as we go through this series, there's something powerful about tracking the story of the Israelites and learning from it what we can take away through this book of Exodus in the Old Testament. And the title, if you like a title, if you're someone who makes notes and writes down the title at the top of your message, well, this is it. This is the top of your notes. It's The Secret of Your Enemy. Intriguing title, right? This is what I wanted. I want to, get you thinking. The Secret of Your Enemy. So there is something about the secret of your enemy that I want to expose. I want to share with you today. But first of all, before we dig into that, I'm recording this here in North Carolina, and I'm here in the USA. We've been building church here for the last 2.5 years. It's been an amazing journey, but it reminded me as I was preparing this message about when I came up against opposition. It was almost 4 years to the day that Rose and I, my wife, we headed to the US Embassy in London, and we went down to go and obtain our visa. Now, we'd gone through the process for about a year of getting ready to go, of starting to hand on our roles to the church, of telling our children we're going to be moving, telling our families. And then this was the last thing that we had to do, was go and get the visa. And it was quite a simple visa. It was just a 6-month visa that we were going for initially, so that we could then launch into the US and start our journey and come and build church over here. And so, as it was quite a simple process, we hadn't put a lot of pressure or expectation around the interview, but we end up going, spending the night in London and getting ready for our interview the next day. So the way that it works is there's a whole heap of different kind of desks that you go up to, different people behind these booths, and you get called up for your interview. And so Rose and I went up and we started answering the questions from the lady. And this lady, she had a face like thunder. It's like there was something just about her. It's like, oh gosh, this is going to be hard. I think you probably know some of those people that you just come across and it's like, you just don't get that good vibe from them. It's like, okay, this could be difficult. This could be tense. So I just, went about my way of trying to answer every question as well as I could and starting to go through the interview and give her the information that he asked for and being very polite and, trying to, and it's not speak unless spoken to. And then it went for about 10-15 minutes through the interview, and then she disappeared for a little bit and she started to speak to a colleague. And after some minutes, she came back, stamped a form and said, "You have been rejected for your US visa. You do not qualify for the visa that you've applied for." And I could not believe it. We'd sold our home. We'd taken our kids out of school. This was just meant to be the transition of going over, the last little piece of the puzzle that we've been working on for this last year. And we were getting shut out. And I realized that I hadn't even had a chance yet to give her all of our paperwork, the supporting paperwork that would support our visa, that maybe would answer the reason that she had rejected us. And I tried saying, look, can you just, first of all, before you reject us, just take a look at this letter. Just take a look at this supporting evidence. And she repeated what she had already said. You've been rejected for your US visa and you will need to apply again. And the more I asked, the firmer she got. And the more frustrated I got. I couldn't believe it. Why was she opposing us? Why was she blocking the thing that God was wanting to do? And I couldn't believe it. We then waited for every person to go in the whole US Embassy office and wait to speak to someone, because surely there had been a mistake. And we spoke to a few people and they tried to help us, but no one could give us access back to our application. It had been rejected and we would have to reapply, which would take a long time, and go through the process again. And we came against this opposition, this opposing force. Now, I mentioned that the title of this message was all about the secret of your enemy. But enemy is not really a term that we use every day, is it? It's almost something that it seems a little bit maybe playground, or maybe something a little bit childish, that not many of us have enemies. But we do all experience opponents or opposing forces, things that are against us, or even people that are against us. And I think that perhaps you're watching this right now and you can relate to a time in your life where it's like, just like my lady at the booth. You come up to a brick wall, you just come up to that person that is just blocking the way, and you feel opposition against you. And it can cause you to feel frustrated. It can cause you to feel confused. It can cause you even self-pity, to start feeling sorry for yourself, even anger. But there is something about this opposition, this opponent, that I want to speak into today. Because in the story of Exodus, there is this great big opponent. There is this huge opponent. There is Pharaoh and the authority of Egypt that the Israelite people come up against. And they start crying out to God. And we heard about this over the last week as we had part 1 with Chris Cook. And they start crying out to God, saying, you've got to help us. We're going through this opposition. We're coming against this opposing force that's taken away our freedom. And if you've ever watched a film about slavery or followed the journey about slavery, there is something quite amazing about a journey of a slave to find their own freedom. It's exceptional. It will amaze you because you don't realize that how hard it is to break free from slavery. I've watched a few films in recent years, and there are these amazing moments where the slave breaks free and you can't believe it. You kind of like head is, in your hands, and you're like looking through your eyes. Are they going to make it? They break free, only for later on, as they're going down the road, to be captured again and taken back into slavery, because it is so hard to escape out of slavery. That's why for thousands of years it's been a successful trade in humanity, is because it's so hard to escape from slavery. So to think about the joy and the celebration of one slave breaking free, if you see it in a film, it's incredibly moving. It's an amazing thing to behold. But to just think about that God the Father breaks free an entire nation of people, over 1 million people free from slavery, it's utterly astonishing. It is incredible. This is why this is one of the most famous stories in the world, because this wasn't just about one slave breaking free or one family or a group. It was about a whole nation breaking free from oppression. Quite an incredible thing that the world has continued to remember for thousands of years later. Because not only is it in God's word, but it is something in history that has never been repeated in the same way. And so, as we look at this story where we see the Israelites coming across against this opposition, we've got to rewind a little bit and look, how did it begin? The way it began was that Joseph had come in to Egypt, and he was actually sold as a slave into Egypt, but he went on to become a man in power, and that's a whole story in itself of influence. And he helped the Egyptians navigate a time of famine and save up their food, and in such a way that they not only survived their own famine, but actually they became rich from surrounding nations all around them that looked to them to so that they could eat from their food that they'd saved through the famine. So not only did they survive and eat well through the famine, they also became incredibly rich and powerful through the famine because of Joseph and because of his leadership. But this was 400 years ago that Joseph had come and all this had happened. It had long been forgotten. And the Israelites that had come into Egypt in this time had grown from being a small group to being thousands, to tens of thousands, to hundreds of thousands, to over 1 million people in Egypt. And the bigger they got, the more looming the nation were to the Egyptians, and they started to fear the Israelites. What if they turn on us? What if they seize power? And so the Egyptians, through Pharaoh, at the time when Moses was born, as we heard about last week, they started to say, right, this is the new rule. Any young Israelite males will be thrown into the River Nile. and they will be killed. And this was how the way that the Egyptians, they lorded over the Israelites. They were then taken into slave labor. So instead of being alongside the Egyptians as they were with Joseph, this was long forgotten. This was hundreds of years later. And now all of that was forgotten that Joseph did. And the current generation, they were oppressing the Israelites. So to break free out of this opposition, these powers and these authorities that were holding the Israelites in slavery, it was going to take something quite extraordinary. And that was why God raised up Moses to come and be that one that would break free the Israelite people. And so in this book of Exodus, we get to follow along the journey of how God does it. It's his plan, and he enacts it in the most amazing way. In Exodus 6, verse 6, it says, "Therefore say to the Israelites, I am the Lord, and I will bring you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians. I will free you from being slaves to them. And I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with mighty acts of judgment. I will take you as my own people. I will be your God." But this was not going to be as simple as stepping in and telling Pharaoh, "Let my people go," and then he just lets them go. It was going to be something that was far more complex than that, because they were so a part of the Egyptian economy, the way that the nation worked. They weren't just going to let these people go. They had free labor. These people were building Egypt for the Egyptians. They were reliant upon them. They didn't want to see them just leave. They wanted to continue to benefit from having the Israelite people as their slaves. And if the Israelite people were going to rise up, it was going to be through bloodshed and fighting and war with huge loss. How on earth could they break free from the power of this opponent, the power of this oppressor? It was going to be through great and divine miracles. And I'm sure whether you're a Christian or whether you're not a Christian today, you've probably heard about what God did, because that is how famous it is around the world. What God did those thousands of years ago is still talked about and famed today with Christians and non-Christians alike. The 10 plagues. And so we're going to look a little bit about these plagues. God was going to remove the deep connection between Egypt and Israel. And I just think about like 10 fingers being interlocked, and just about how there was going to be this removal one at a time of the root and the systems and the structures and the connection between Egypt and Israel. He couldn't just rip it out. There was this slow process that would take place just as God removed it, because there had been hundreds of years they'd been embedded together. And so moment by moment, structure by structure, God was removing from the Egyptians this Israelite connection so that they could be free. And God says in Exodus 6 verse 1, "Now you will see what I will do to Pharaoh. Because of my mighty hand, he will let them go. Because of my mighty hand, he will drive them out of his country." But then in verse 9, it says, "Moses reported this to the Israelites, but they did not listen to him because of their discouragement and harsh labor." They had been under such oppression, it was hard for them to even hear the plan to break free from their oppressor. And I know that for many of us, we've been through this Cave Weekend, which is our annual conference gathering we've just had, in the most amazing experience of coming and gaining freedom and gaining breakthrough. But there's something about now walking out that process, walking it out in the coming weeks and months, which is why we want to study this journey, because it's almost like these things, just like with the Israelites and Egyptians, it's just like us and our sin. They've been embedded in our lives. And now it's time, one by one, to strip free of those things that have embedded themselves into our lives. Some people will just have that instant tear, but others, you will have to walk out week on week the separation of those things from your life. Just as the Israelites and the Egyptians went through this process of week by week separating and coming apart from one another. So I want to tell you about the first plague, and that was in Exodus 7 verses 20 to 23. It says this: Moses and Aaron did just as the Lord had commanded. He raised his staff in the presence of Pharaoh and his officials and struck the water of the Nile. And all the water was changed into blood. The fish in the Nile died, and the river smelled so bad that the Egyptians could not drink its water. Blood was everywhere in Egypt. But the Egyptian magicians did the same thing by their secret arts, and Pharaoh's heart became hard. He would not listen to Moses and Aaron, just as the Lord had said. Instead, he turned and went to his palace and did not take even this to heart. So Pharaoh has witnessed this incredible thing before him. The whole of the Nile being turned to blood. The outpouring of God's wonder and miracle through this plague. But he turns his back and chooses to ignore it. So again, the Israelite people, they say, wow, look at the wondrous thing that God has done. But Pharaoh, the oppressor, the enemy, he stands there and he's unmoved by it. So the next plague was the plague of frogs, where God sent frogs everywhere in Egypt. They were in their homes, they were in pots, they were in their kitchens, and they were overwhelmed by the amount of frogs. I know even the thought of that for some of you guys today is just creeping you out right now. I remember when I first moved here to the US, there's frogs crawling up my house. I mean, literally, you'd open a window and they would just be there on the window. And then I remember one time I went to go take my wheelie bin out to the pavement for the trash to come and collect it, and there was a frog on top of the wheelie bin, and it's green. He was green, and I did not see him, and he jumped out of me, and it scared the life out of me. I almost tripped over. So that was just one frog. I can't imagine going around the house and finding them everywhere. It would drive you absolutely bananas. And it did to Pharaoh and all of Egypt. They hated it. They wanted the frogs to be gone. So this is what happens in Exodus 8:15. We find that Pharaoh is saying, right, okay, I'm listening. You've got my ear. Get rid of these frogs, please, Moses. So Moses prays and says, okay, if you're going to let us go, if this is a deal, if we're on, the frogs are gone. So he prays and the frogs go. But then in 8:15 it says, but when Pharaoh saw that there was relief, he hardened his heart and would not listen to Moses and Aaron, just as the Lord had said. There was this enemy that they were coming up against that not only had them in slavery, not only had his power over them, that was the oppressor, but also would make commitments to them and then break those commitments. Can you imagine how the Israelite people felt? That they was, the word's going out. Pharaoh has said, yes, all these frogs, they've changed his mind. He's going to let us go. And then he rescinded on his commitment. He stepped back and said, actually, now that there's relief, I'm not going to let you go. And this happened time and time again over the coming weeks. Because there would be another plague, and then Pharaoh would say, please stop it, please take it away. And then whenever Moses would pray and cease the plague, then Pharaoh would step back on his commitment again. He would break his promise again. So time and time again, the Israelites, they're trying to break free, and yet they cannot have their freedom because it keeps getting taken away from them. So this Pharaoh, what an enemy, what opposition, this powerful monster that will not let these people go. And even as you're listening to this right now, thinking about the opposing forces that you've come against, thinking about the enemies, maybe it's something that even as we've gone through the cave just recently as a church, that there's something about breaking free from that opposing thing that has been in your life. Well, this is the secret that I want to share with you about your enemy. And it's here in this chapter 9, okay? In Exodus chapter 9, verse 16, God is talking about Pharaoh. And it says in verses 16 to 17, I have raised you up for this very purpose, that I might show you my power and that my name might be proclaimed in all the earth. You still set yourself against my people and will not let them go. There is no doubt that Pharaoh is the one that is hardening his heart through not wanting to let the Israelites go. But God leverages this enemy to do something amazing that is talked about for thousands of years later. To do something in the Israelites that's going to set them up for their whole future as a nation. So I want you to take this truth for yourself today, that God can leverage the enemy that you have in your life to come and do something that couldn't be done. That God can actually take what you see as an opposition and use it for His glory. And that's one of the things that gets me excited for this message today, gets me excited for you to access this truth, is because when we see an enemy and we just think about the fact that it's against us and that we start getting angry and we start feeling sorry for ourselves and we feel self-pity, it actually immobilizes us. It stops us from moving forward. But when we see that actually God can even use what we would deem as an enemy and use it for His glory, then we can start moving again. We can start getting confidence again that even as we feel opposition, that God is still moving. And so I want to reveal to us about the several ways that God uses an enemy in our lives to leverage us forward. My first point that I want you to take away from this is that an enemy is used to shake us from our complacency. An enemy is used to shake us from our complacency. So there is something that as we continue to follow the story of the Israelites as they come out of Egypt, that we see that is very present within the people, is that they were comfortable in Egypt. And you're thinking, you weren't free. You were slaves. These people literally took your sons, your ancestors, and threw them as infants into the Nile. This was a terrible oppression. And yet what we see in future chapters that we will go on to teach about and learn about is the fact that the Israelites look back in some way of affection under being Egyptian rule. They were so used to it. And actually, they needed to be shaken up with this great strong enemy to actually get them to leave Egypt. That if it was just right, guys, we're going to go, but we've got so much access here. We're comfortable here. Our lives are here. We've brought up our children here. We've been here for hundreds of years. But what God did through the enemy of Pharaoh is it shook the Israelites out of their complacency. And you might have been in a time in your life where you were just kind of going along and things were okay, but you came against an enemy and all of a sudden it shook you out of a complacency. It shook you out of just going through the motions and says, hold on, I'm in a fight. I need to move differently. I need to think differently. I need to pray differently. I remember in 2011 in our church in Hereford, we were just about to plant a church into another city, into Cardiff, and it was the most amazing time, full of excitement, full of vision, full of passion. And as we were going on this journey, we were just so enthused with what God was doing. And then all of a sudden, just 2 weeks before we were about to go and do our first ever church plant out of Herefordshire, we get an opposing article. And if you want to read about it, you can find all about it in the Firestarters book. But we had this opposition article in a local paper. We'd never experienced that in all of our decades of doing church. And then just before we're about to church plant, whoa, we were shaken out of our complacency. This isn't just an enthusiastic adventure. This isn't just, a joyous, faith-filled thing that we're doing. This is a battle. There is an enemy that opposes us. And so all of a sudden, we weren't complacent. We were praying hard. We were believing for more. We were starting to get mobilized as a church to say, okay, what is God going to do through this? The second point that I want you to take away from this, the enemy can be used, it can be leveraged in our lives to unite us. To unite us. There is something about looking at this picture of Israel and seeing all these different tribes, seeing all these different factions. They weren't governed, they weren't ruled in the way that a nation is meant to be. And so there was probably lots of disunity and lots of different opinions and directions. But what happens is when there is an enemy against you as an entire nation, all of those things, all of those squabbles and infighting and differences of opinions, they all become decimated by the power of an opposing enemy. And all of a sudden, all the things that you were maybe distracted or discouraged by, they become meaningless. And you become united as one. And I think we've even seen an example of that within Europe at the moment with the battle for Ukraine and against Russia. Because as there was maybe lots of differences of factions in Europe and lots of different ways of doing things, all of a sudden there was this mobilization of unity, a collective unity against this enemy. And so instead of this enemy and in it being this force of power that's coming in from Russia that is come to invade, all of a sudden there's this mobilization of unity where there was maybe a distraction, maybe there was this difference of opinion, different ways of doing things, all of a sudden a united front. That's what an enemy does. And so when you experience an enemy in your life, think about what's this going to do for our unity? What's this going to do for bringing us together? The third thing that an enemy can be used to leverage in our life is it can bring us closer to God. Because if you don't need anything, if you don't have anything to oppose you in your life, we can do things in our own strength and you kind of go about in your own power and you go about in your own confidence. But when you experience opposition, when something comes against you, you start praying more, right? You start looking to heaven more and saying, God, I need you to intervene in my life. I'm needing you now. God, we're pressing in prayer. God, we're still knocking. We're still fighting. What's going on? How are you going to move? All of a sudden, a people that were ignoring God then start knocking at his door. We grow in our relationship with him. We grow in our closeness to him. We grow in our dependence upon him. So God leverages an enemy in our lives to actually bring us closer to him. Because we as humanity, we're so good at doing it in our own strength. Actually, we get to this part where we don't need God so much anymore and we become independent from him. But when you come to opposition, when you come up against an enemy, all of a sudden you start leaning into God, and that's the best place to be. Because the Israelites, they had been living in this culture of Egypt for generations and had been influenced by Egyptian culture, influenced by their worship, influenced by their morality. But what happens as they start to feel the opposition of being under Egyptian rule? They start to cry out to God because of having an enemy. And so I want to encourage you that when you have an enemy, look at it at the way that God is wanting you to actually come closer to him. The fourth thing that I want us to take away from this about how God can leverage an enemy in our lives is that God is glorified when we overcome. There is something about when we have to go up against an enemy and we have to fight them and we are victorious over them, God gets the glory. There's something about bringing glory and bringing fame to his name that we were made for. But if you never go up against something that's impossible, how do you get to give glory to God? Because what we see in this story, it's a marvel. It's incredible. Because you're so used to it, you might not see it. You might not realize because you grew up with hearing about it in Sunday school or you grew up hearing about it through a movie. But there is something absolutely sensational about this miracle. It's still, the echoes, the resounding ripples of it are still going around the world right now, giving God glory. Even through today, hearing this message, we're still coming back to this story and it's still today, God is getting the glory because the Israelite people got set free. They broke free from oppression and it gives God the glory. But if you don't have an enemy to conquer over, where does the glory come? And so when an enemy comes into your life, maybe it's an opposition, maybe it's something that feels overwhelming, but you then go and fight against it. You go and see what God does through you overcoming that enemy. He gets glorified. And the people in your life start looking and saying, how did that happen? God, my Father, the Spirit. That is how I overcame. That is how I saw a breakthrough. That is how this miracle came to be, and He gets the glory. But if you start looking at this enemy and feeling sorry for yourself and start to, feel overwhelmed and feel discouraged, we're missing the point of actually God brought this enemy so that He then can be glorified. That's what I love about the story of David and Goliath, is he saw Goliath as this great enemy that was to be conquered. But the rest of the Israelites, they saw this big giant and they were intimidated and afraid. But David knew that as he went against Goliath, that he was going to give God glory that day because no one thought it could be done. And when he did it, he gave glory to God. That's how we need to come up against these opponents in our lives. The fifth thing that God wants to do to leverage an enemy in your life is that the enemy owes you a payday. Guys, this is good news. The enemy owes you a payday. Okay? I want to share these verses with you that after the 10 plagues came to pass, in Exodus 12 verses 35 to 36, it says this: "The Israelites did as Moses instructed and asked the Egyptians for articles of silver and gold and for clothing. The Lord made the Egyptians favorably disposed towards the people, and they gave them what they asked for. So they plundered the Egyptians." Now, what you've got to remember is that the Israelite people have been working for free, working as slaves for generations. And so they start knocking on the doors of their neighbors in Egypt and saying, "We want some silver and gold." And the Egyptians give it to them. So they don't only go just with their freedom, they actually get paid off as well. They go with riches into the desert in this most extraordinary way, because Pharaoh comes to this breaking point where he's like, right, I'm going to release all of these Israelites. And the day that comes when it's time to go, they knock on the door and they take plunder with them. It says in Proverbs 6 verse 31 that an enemy, when a thief is caught, that he must repay what he's stolen 7 times. And I want to say to every person that has experienced a thief stealing in their life, where they have come across an opponent who's come to take something from you, there is a payday that is waiting. There is a payback that is coming. Whatever you've experienced, maybe there's been years where you have gone through oppression and you felt like you've had something taken from you. The promise of God is that the enemy must repay 7 times what he stole. We see that through this story in Exodus, where the Egyptians are literally not only releasing them as slaves, but literally paying them as they go. And I want to encourage you with this truth today, that whatever you have been facing, whatever opponent, whatever enemy that you've come against, I believe that God is saying to you today, come and obtain the reward. Come and get the payback that I have for you through that enemy. They're going to have to hand over what they owe. And my last point that I want to make on this is that the enemy teaches us to be victors, to walk in victory. I used the example of David and Goliath a moment ago. And David was a shepherd that had this experience of fighting against opponents. One was a lion and one was a bear. And what that meant is that when he came to face Goliath, the giant, on that day, he was a victor. He was confident that God was with him because he had a mentality of victory. He had a mentality that God would come and bring the breakthrough for him and with him and through him. We have missed the point that God is leveraging them in our lives so that we can be prepared for the giant that's to come, where we can have victory once again. But if we cower or we push away that opponent, then we miss out on that opportunity to learn a mentality of victory. So whatever enemy that you've broken free from recently, or whatever you're facing even now, whatever you've got to walk out this week, you've got to think about it, that God is trying to teach you about victory, a mentality of victory, that you can conquer an opponent through his power. The only power that an enemy has is the power that God has given them over you. There's this extraordinary moment where Jesus is in front of Pilate, and Pilate is saying to him, a Roman, an enemy, an opponent, he's got the power to crucify him. He's saying, look, why don't you speak up? I've got the power to set you free. I've got the power of life, the power of death. And Jesus says to him, the only power you have over me is the power my Father gave you. Imagine if we went with that mentality when we came against our opponents and our enemies, that we realized actually the only power they've got is the power that God has given them over me. And I can trust the hand of the Father. And I think about this picture, right, is that if someone comes towards you with a blade, it can be frightening, it can be fearful, but that blade could be a scalpel. And there's something about, it's about the hand that the blade is in, and you could trust that hand. Because it might seem like an enemy, but it's actually going to cut the very thing out that is causing the pain, the suffering. It's going to break you free into freedom. And it's trusting the hand that ultimately that the scalpel is in. That's how we need to view an enemy, is we need to trust the hand that the scalpel is ultimately in. I shared this story at the start of the message, all about how we went to go and obtain our US visa, and I came to this sour-faced woman who was like a brick wall and was not going to let us through. And it turned out that opposition, that enemy, it was the very thing that we needed. Because if we had gone forward, we would have packed up our lives and we'd got on a plane and we would have gone and pursued a completely different path to what God had for us in the USA. I'm here in Raleigh, North Carolina today, and we were going to be heading to another part of the States on a different journey. But God shut that door. He put an opposition in our way for his purposes and for his glory. I couldn't see that at the time. I was frustrated. I was angry at God. I was confused. But I came to this revelation that God had leveraged this enemy, this opponent, for his purposes. And so I want to encourage every person today that as we close out this message, whatever you walk out this week, whatever opposition or enemy you feel about in your life, whether it's you personally, whether it's a force outside of you, wherever you come against this opposition and enemy, know that God can actually leverage that for his glory, to bring you forward, to do some amazing things in your life, and take confidence that the scalpel is in his hands, because he is a good God. He is a good Father. And as you lean into him, see what he will do, even through the power of an enemy. So as we finish this message today, I pray that you go out with faith and courage and confidence that God is with you no matter what you face. Be blessed in Jesus' name.
That was such an incredible message. Thank you so much, Josh, for sharing, bringing that word. And I encourage all of you, even if you are at home alone or you are in a venue, reach out to somebody, share it with somebody, and really get accountable. Because honestly, the only way we can apply this word is sometimes going on this journey with someone else. So even as we keep hearing, and this has been an incredible day, it's been an incredible second week. So as we hear the word, we want to be doers of the word. So we will encourage you, be a changeling, go practice this word, put into action. And if you feel like you need to respond in some way, to talk to somebody about it, you can message us, reach out. If you are in a location, talk to somebody who invited you or the leaders in your location. But we want to be doers of the word.
Amen. And so if you did respond at all
Yeah.
today, if this message stirred something in you, we would love to hear from you, like Joanne said.
Yeah.
And please email us at hello@freedomchurch.cc. Whether you have any questions, whether you want to know more details about a physical
Yeah.
location near you,
Yeah.
whatever it is, please reach out to us at hello@freedomchurch.cc. We would love to hear from you. But that's all for today.
Yeah.
And we cannot wait for Exodus Part 3, which
Part
is happening
3.
next week.
Yeah.
So please join us again and share that invite with other friends as well. God bless you guys.
Bless you.